They had said humanity was nothing more than a speck, an evolutionary accident, unworthy of concern. Grand Admiral Vexnar had assured the Hegemony Council as much the moment scouts detected bipedal life spilling beyond its cradle. Barely evolved primates playing with toys they do not understand, he'd scoffed. How hollow that certainty sounds now, from the smoking ruins of our capital. I am Torlok Zoom, chief historian of what remains of the Zirian hegemony. I record this as both confession and warning for whatever civilizations survived this merciless age. We should have recognized the signs. We should have listened. Lieutenant Crest reported they've weaponized a gas giant, she said during a routine briefing, voice steady as calculations unspooled across the projection. 17 Jovian extraction platforms in their outer territories. Vexnar waved the report away with a dismissive ripple of his tertiary appendage. Let them burn hydrogen. What can they do with it that we cannot counter? Press, always the cautious one, watched her crimson scales darken. The energy outputs suggest antimatter stockpiling. Our projections indicate, your projections indicate fear, Vexnar cut in. These humans haven't even unified their home world. They bicker among themselves. They're divided, primitive, unprepared for real conflict. We were all spectacularly, catastrophically wrong. Tension erupted at Outpost Velanine, a frontier station that separated hegemony space from the burgeoning human sphere. Their New Montana had been founded against our warning's insolence. Yes, but hardly justification for war. According to our strategy board, we should make an example of them. General Pra urged at the emergency council, his tentacles coiling nervously around the ceremonial staff, a precision strike to remind them of their place. Supreme Overlord Zuvin's 4 eyes narrowed as she considered. They ignored 17 diplomatic warnings. Their arrogance grows with each cycle. Perhaps Pra is right. A demonstration is required. I risked a rare dissent. Supreme One, cultural analysis indicates humans respond poorly to existential threats. Their historical patterns show psychology is irrelevant, Vexnar snapped. They're violating sovereign territory. And so, with a casual arrogance that now haunts my dreams, the order was given. Operation Swift Justice. 3 battle cruisers, 5,000 troops, 1 human colony. The attack lasted under 6 hours. New Montana population 37,452 ceased to exist. Our official debrief called it a resounding success, with minimal collateral damage to valuable mineral stores. We laughed at the irony. We joked about hackers and dancing videos in the mess hall. We pretended normalcy while the first signs of something far worse crept toward us. When the communication blackout came 3 days later, nobody panicked. Solar flares, equipment glitches, plausible excuses proliferated. Probably those human hackers again, Commander Pelk said over ration trays. And we laughed like gods of the void. The arrival itself was impossible. The ship appeared in orbit above Zephyria Prime with no hyperspace signature. No drive signature, 1 heartbeat empty space, then a vessel of unfamiliar design suspended against the stars. Black and silent. It hung like a wound in the sky. This is Zirian Defense Command, Admiral Vexnar transmitted. Membrane trembling more with indignation than fear. You have entered sovereign space without authorization. Identify yourself. Silence stretched. 27 minutes of dread as our home fleet mobilized. As Supreme Overlord Zuvan was hustled to the emergency bunker, as sensors returned data that made even our engineers whisper in disbelief, sir. Energy readings are impossible, the sensor officer stammered. The vessel's mass matches a light cruiser, but its power output equals a small star. When the human voice finally answered, it came through clear and unfiltered, no translator lag. A single female timbre, absolutely certain. This is Admiral Eleanor Reyes of the United Earth Navy, she said. You massacred 37,452 of our people. 412 were children under 10. We have come for the bill. Vexnar tried the old language of diplomacy. Admiral, there appears to be a misunderstanding. The settlement, no misunderstanding, Reyes interrupted. You had options. Diplomacy, negotiation, even simple restraint. You chose annihilation. Her words were not a threat so much as a ledger settled in cold arithmetic. We could not comprehend the scale of the force that followed the voice, power that did not arrive through our usual channels, one that rewrote the rules of engagement overnight. The arrogance with which we had judged them became the measuring stick of our own hubris. What came next was not so much retaliation as revelation. The humans had learned to harness energies we had assumed beyond their reach. They wielded consequences with the same cruel efficiency we had once assumed belonged only to us. And those consequences found us in our complacency, in the chambers where decisions had been made as if the universe would tolerate our casual cruelty forever. I write this now from the shadow of that arrogance. The hegemony is broken, our capital a ruin, our counsels hollow. Whether I speak to admonish history or to beg forgiveness, I do not know. But let this stand. Never mistake a rising species for a plaything, and never assume cruelty is free of cost. They answered not with fury, but with an almost clinical calm. You chose extermination instead of negotiation, the human voice said, steady and unhurried. Vexnar bristled. Listen, he began. No, the voice cut in. You listen. There was no tremor in it. We tried to be peaceful neighbors. You read that as weakness. That was your mistake, the last mistake your leadership will ever make. When more ships arrived, they arrived like a tightening loop around our world. Not a scattered raid, but a deliberate encirclement. We do not want war, Admiral Reyes told us plainly. But we will finish what you started. She set a condition with the bluntness of an accountant closing a ledger. Deliver every individual involved in planning and executing the attack on New Montana. Every officer, every soldier, every policymaker who signed the orders within 6 hours. After that, they would come for them themselves, and they promised no mercy. Vexnar's membrane flushed with purple outrage. This is absurd. You cannot expect 6 hours, the voice repeated. Then the line went dead. Panic spread through the command center like a contagion. They're bluffing, Vexnar insisted, and ordered the fleet to mobilize every vessel we had. I tried to make one last appeal to reason. The human historical record, I reminded them, shows a pattern. They rarely issue threats they do not intend to honor. You call them primitives? Vexnar roared. 2 decades ago, their fastest ships barely grazed light speed. Yes, I said. And somehow now they stand before us with technologies we cannot even parse. Isn't that? My words trailed off under the weight of what the sensors had begun to reveal. The 6 hours came and passed with no surrender. Zuvin commanded defiance from her bunker. Bring our fleet into a protective sphere around Jiria Prime, 8,000 warships arrayed like teeth. Armed with enough ordnance to turn worlds into dust. Let them try, the Supreme Overlord declared. Show these upstarts the price of daring an empire 10,000 years their senior. What followed shattered every assumption we had about warfare. There were no screaming plasma salvos, no orbital bombardments, no thunderous detonations. Instead, the human ships released small, pod-like objects that drifted through the void toward our lines. They were tiny, almost insignificant, nothing like the weapons we had trained for. Analysis. Vexnar demanded. Unknown, his officers answered. They seemed mechanical, maybe drones. The report said orders went out to destroy them. Lasers lanced through space, scarring the darkness, and the beams passed through the objects as if they were made of light. For a moment, someone muttered holograms, but that word was swallowed by the next horror. The pod slipped. Through our shields and hulls with impossible ease. They phased into ships, moving past plating and structural bulkheads into the very heart of our vessels. Then they disgorged figures, human forms, projections that behaved with an eerie solidity. They were not mere images. They interacted with consoles, gripped railings, stepped through corridors as if weighty and real. How is this possible? Vexnar breathed as reports cascaded in. Throughout the fleet, these apparitions walked into command centers, ignoring the screams and the flailing weapons. They did not shoot. They did not detonate cataclysms. They simply approached precise, unhurried, and touched those they had come for. Where contact occurred, officers vanished. One moment a senior commander stood arguing orders. The next, both he and the projection that had taken him were gone, as if folded out of existence. Crews watched in stunned silence as houses, mess halls, brig cells emptied. The guilty, the complicit, the ones who had authorized annihilation, all removed without a trace. Within 20 minutes, the list was complete. Every person tied to the New Montana operation, planners, executors, the officials who had rubber-stamped the strike had been taken from our ships, our barracks, and our homes. The fleet, bristling with centuries of dominance, had been made suddenly, humiliatingly powerless to stop a force that refused to fight by our rules. Even the deepest sanctuaries offered no protection. Secure bunkers buried kilometers beneath the surface failed to shield their occupants. 843 Zirians vanished without a single shot fired, among them General Pra himself. Not even Supreme Overlord Zuvin, surrounded by her elite guard in the most fortified chamber of the planet, escaped. She disappeared between one breath and the next. Only Grand Admiral Vexnar remained, barricaded within the quantum-shielded command vault of his flagship, the most impregnable fortress our science had ever conceived. His voice cracked over the coms, shrill with desperation. "What do you want? What are you?" The reply came at once, as if Admiral Reyes had been waiting. "We are what you made us, Admiral. At New Montana, you taught us the language you respect force, and now we speak it fluently." Then the impossible happened. A human projection materialized inside the vault, striding effortlessly through shields and walls that had cost more than planetary defense grids. Vexnar stumbled back in horror. "This cannot be real," he whispered. "Your species split atoms only 3 centuries ago." The projection smiled faintly. "Necessity, Admiral, is the sharpest teacher. We are not the first you've underestimated. Only the most recent. What have you done with the others?" Vexnar demanded, his membrane pale with terror. "They live," Reyes's echo answered. "They stand trial for their crimes. Justice will be served." The Phantom extended a hand toward him. "It's your turn." Vexnar's defiance flared one last time. "And what of justice for your crimes? This technology violates every law of physics, every treaty on warfare. Abominations. All of it. You've broken every code in the galaxy." The human smile faded. "Spare us your outrage, Admiral. It comes poorly from the species that slaughtered a colony of civilians. Hypocrisy does not make a shield." Vexnar roared his final declaration. "We are the Zirian hegemony. We ruled these stars before your kind learned fire. You cannot simply, you already know we can." The projection reached out. The Grand Admiral vanished. Moments later, the human ships departed as mysteriously as they had arrived, winking out of existence one by one. Within an hour, only a single vessel remained above the capital. It broadcast a final message, carried on every frequency across the planet. "People of the Zirian hegemony, those who ordered the massacre at New Montana now face justice under human law. We have no quarrel with your civilians. But know this. Any further aggression against human worlds will bring consequences beyond imagining. Today, we took your leaders. Next time, we take everything." Then the last ship vanished, leaving us leaderless, shaken, and utterly terrified. What followed was chaos. The Hegemony Council, stripped of its supreme overlord and military command, scrambled to impose order. Conspiracies bloomed. Cults appeared overnight, declaring the humans instruments of divine judgment. I was summoned to the chamber, asked to explain what had happened. How could they create such technology without our knowledge? Counselor Drays demanded, her facial ridges burning crimson with distress. I could only speculate. Humans do not follow predictable paths. Their sciences leap, skip, or improvise. They innovate in ways we cannot model. That doesn't explain technology that ignores the laws of matter itself. Another counselor objected. No, I admitted. but history shows they advance fastest when threatened. They call it wartime innovation, and we most certainly threatened them. The chamber fell silent, each of us wrestling with the same question. Finally, Counselor Dre gave it voice. Will they come back? I considered before answering. That depends entirely on us. They have shown restraint. They could have annihilated our fleets, razed our worlds. Instead, they performed precise extractions, only those guilty of New Montana. It suggests they prefer peace. But make no mistake, they are ready for war. 2 days later, word arrived from human space. Grand Admiral Vexner had stood trial, convicted of crimes against sentient life, and sentenced to something they call supermax isolation, imprisonment so complete it may as well be eternity. The others received similar punishments. General Pra's fate was no better. Rumors said some had taken their own lives during captivity. The fate of Supreme Overlord Zuvon remained uncertain. Whispers insisted she was being held apart, accused as the architect of our aggression. We clung to hope a humiliating episode, perhaps, but one we could recover from. Replace the leadership, rebuild our pride. Develop countermeasures against whatever phantom technology the humans had used. How naive we were. How arrogant, even in defeat. The humans were not finished with their lessons. For 38 days after the abduction, the Xerian hegemony hovered in an uneasy limbo. Markets crashed. Provincial governors declared independence. Commanders afraid of provoking further human retribution refused orders to patrol even core systems. Panic and bargaining took the place of strategy. Sue for peace immediately.
Counselor Dre urged at an emergency session.
Formal apologies, reparations, territorial concessions, whatever it takes. Counselor Brazek. The representative of our military-industrial bloc bristled. Capitulation, he spat. This was their most advanced technology, a desperate gambit they cannot sustain. The debate became a theater in which those who had once been silent suddenly found bold opinions. From my historian's alcove, I watched how quickly conviction shifted when survival was at stake. Desperation. Dre laughed, a hollow sound. Did you see the same thing the rest of us did? They bypassed our top defenses with systems we cannot model, let alone counter. Brazak's membranes pulsed with fury. One ship slipping undetected might be explained as experimental stealth. An entire fleet appearing at once could not. It had to be some grand illusion. A junior counselor, a name I had never bothered to memorize. Interrupted to read a bulletin. The humans were returning Supreme Overlord Zuvin tomorrow. The chamber exploded into stunned exclamations. Returning her? Why? The junior counselor read on, swallowing. She had been found mentally unfit to stand trial, as the message said. Something the humans labeled PTSD, and was being returned as a humanitarian gesture. Humanitarian? Dre spat the unfamiliar word like bile. Even their mercy had to be performative. I felt a strange curiosity at that moment. What could have broken Zuvin so completely in weeks? She had survived assassination attempts and personally executed predecessors. She was steel and teeth, not fragility. But the image of the woman who arrived the next day answered some of that unease. She was returned on the steps of the High Conclave in a blink of warped space. A bubble that appeared deposited her and vanished. Medical teams rushed her inside. Physically, she was unmistakably Zuvin. For eyes, ceremonial scale patterns, the rank markings of the Supreme Overlord, but the mind behind those eyes had been unmade. She stared without blinking, unresponsive to questions, muttering fractured phrases that suggested she had seen things language could not hold. They pulled the stars apart, she whispered once, unwound them like thread. Gods walking in human skin, she mouthed another time. The council classified her statements, but whispers refused to be contained. The once terrifying sovereign had become a broken enigma, reduced to incoherent fragments by whatever she had endured. 3 days later, the mood shifted again. Human diplomatic vessel announced its intention through proper channels and requested permission to dispatch representatives. The council exhausted and eager for any sign of normalcy. Granted permission almost immediately. Their delegation was modest. Ambassador Thomas Reiko, compact and exacting. Dr. Hervati Jindal, introduced as a specialist in xenopsychology, and Commander Dante Washington, a towering military presence whose uniform bore far fewer decorations than our lowest cadets' epaulets. An odd humility that felt deliberate. They came bearing the manners and restraint of a species that had just rewritten a chapter of galactic order. The arrival of 3 unemphatic individuals, escorted into our halls under watchful eyes, felt both like an offering and a test. We had been taught, in the space of weeks, that appearances deceived and restraint could carry a weight far heavier than any bombardment. They broke the silence with bluntness, as if to puncture the tension before it calcified. "Let's acknowledge the obvious," Commander Dante Washington said, cutting through protocol. "You are terrified, bewildered by recent events, and unsure of our intentions." "That's understandable, Ambassador." Reiko shot him a quick look, the kind that implied this was no scripted line. But Washington continued without apology. 3 weeks ago, you had never lost a war in 10,000 years. Your technological dominance was absolute. Then you picked a fight with humans. Now, your leadership is imprisoned. Your supreme overlord is catatonic, and your military hides in bunkers. That is a drastic adjustment. "Perhaps a more diplomatic tone would help," Ambassador Reiko offered. Washington's reply was flat. "Pleasantries are past." Counselor Dre, finding courage she had not shown before, leaned forward and asked the question everyone wanted answered. "What do you want from us?" Washington's expression softened just enough to be sincere. Peace. A genuine, lasting peace. Despite what you may think, humans do not crave conflict. They have simply proven exceptionally capable when provoked. Dr. Hervati Jindal stepped forward next. Her movements deliberate despite our planet's heavier gravity. "We have studied your civilization extensively. Your achievements in mathematics, architecture, and stellar engineering are remarkable. There is much we could exchange." The tragedy at New Montana was avoidable. Brazak's voice dripped contempt. "You frame it as tragedy, not as a lawful military response to encroachment." Washington turned his gaze on Brazak with measured danger. "Your predecessor voiced similar rationalizations about slaughtering civilians. Would you like to join him?" The threat was a cold thing hanging in the air. Ambassador Reiko intervened to steady the tone. "What the commander means is perspective matters. From our point of view, New Montana was a civilian scientific outpost in unclaimed space, a community that included terraforming specialists working. Zephyrians included." Brazak scoffed at the claim. Citing long-standing territorial assertions, Dr. Jindal cut him off with precise correction. "Your recorded claim on that sector dates back 206 years. And the Galactic Registry notes that failure to establish a permanent settlement within 180 standard years renders a claim contestable. You declared ownership but never established presence, colonization, or terraforming. You assumed compliance. Humans contested it. Reiko produced a compact device and projected a holographic copy of the original territorial filing, complete with seals and clauses. The council fell into uneasy silence as the legalism of their own bureaucracy undermined the instinct to rage. "This legal debate is interesting," Counselor Dre said, "but it doesn't address our present reality. Your people abducted our leaders, demonstrated technologies that neutralize our defenses, and asserted clear military dominance. What are your terms?" Commander Washington's smile was careful. "Our terms are straightforward. First, formal acknowledgement that New Montana was a legal settlement. Second, reparations to the families of the deceased. Third, a binding non-aggression pact between humanity and the hegemony." Brazak's membranes fluttered in disbelief. "That's all? No territorial concessions? No forced technology transfers? No disarmament?" "No," Washington answered dryly. "Would you prefer harsher terms?" Several counselors answered in the negative. Ambassador Reiko looked relieved. "Excellent. We will forward a detailed agreement for your review. Assuming it is acceptable, normal diplomatic relations can resume. It felt almost too generous. From my observer's alcove, I could not resist asking the question everyone else feared. What about our captured leaders, Grand Admiral Vexnar, and the others taken during the New Montana operation? Dr. Jindal's expression was sympathetic, but resolute. They were tried and sentenced for war crimes under human and galactic convention law. Their sentences will be carried out, and Supreme Overlord Zuvan. I pressed. Washington's features darkened. Nothing intentional was done to her. During processing, she was temporarily held at a research facility where she accessed restricted files by unknown means. What she saw was not meant for unprepared minds. Dress's face drained of color. What files? She demanded. What could possibly break someone like Zuvan? The three humans exchanged a brief glance. Ambassador Rocco gave a subtle nod, and Commander Washington spoke, his voice low and deliberate. Project Prometheus. Our contingency plan if your species had escalated rather than surrendered, Counselor Drays admitted with unease. I don't understand. Dr. Jindal's tone softened, though her words carried weight. What you've seen so far? Phase shift extractions. Instantaneous fleet deployments that was only a fragment of our defensive capability. Project Prometheus is something else entirely. Something in her voice sent a chill through every being in the chamber. The meeting ended not long after, with the council giving unanimous approval to the human terms. As the delegation prepared to leave, I found myself near Commander Washington. Commander, I said quietly, I am Tor Lacombe, Chief Historian. May I ask one question? He studied me for a moment before nodding. One, you showed restraint. You could have destroyed us completely, yet chose precision over annihilation. That is not what history teaches us of humanity when wronged. Why? Washington's expression shifted, his words sharp as blades. Who said anything about mercy? We removed your corrupt leadership, left your civilization intact but destabilized, and displayed technologies you can't understand, let alone counter. Now you will spend the next century in paranoia, waiting for shadows while your economy and military rot from fear. Sometimes vengeance is most effective when you let the enemy live long enough to regret every choice they made. I watched him depart, the weight of his words colder than any execution. He was right. The hegemony never recovered. The peace treaty was signed, reparations paid, and diplomatic ties forged. On the surface, life resumed, but beneath it all, our supremacy was shattered. We were exposed as hollow, our arrogance gutted. For 2 years, an uneasy peace held. Trade routes reopened, cultural exchanges began, and even human aid flowed in the form of infrastructure modernization. Yet this fragile calm ended. Skrell incident. The Krell Dominion. Ancient rivals of ours had watched our humiliation with greedy calculation. They underestimated what humanity's restraint truly meant. When a Krell raiding force struck a human mining facility in the Epsilon Eridani system, a typical smash-and-grab assault that left 17 humans dead, they believed they had struck and escaped unscathed. 3 heavy cruisers and their escorts returned home triumphant. 3 days later, the Atropos anomaly began. At first, scientists reported strange readings from the Krell home system, gravitational distortions, radiation spikes, space-time fractures that made no sense. Then the impossible occurred. The Krell star, a stable G-type main-sequence sun, not unlike Sol, began to unravel. Not collapse, not explode, unravel. Its plasma peeled away in spirals. Streaming like ribbons from a spool of thread, within hours, radiation scoured the Krell homeworld. By the 7th hour, its crust was liquid fire. By the 12th, their cities, their archives, their entire civilization were gone. In 19 hours, nothing remained but drifting ash dot. No human vessels were seen. No weapon signatures detected. No trace of known stellar manipulation. The stars simply came apart, and when it was done, the stellar remains coiled into a haunting shape. Visible from certain angles, a vast, stylized human hand. Palm outstretched, the message could not have been clearer. When pressed, The United Earth government denied involvement. The stellar event appears to be a previously undocumented natural phenomenon, they declared, offering condolences with perfectly measured sincerity. Not a single government believed them. Not one, but who dared demand proof? Who would risk their own stars unraveling in response? That is how peace came to our galaxy, not through treaties, not through understanding, but through the paralyzing fear of humanity's vengeance. They could have conquered and enslaved us, but instead, they left us alive to live beneath the shadow of their power. I have studied humanity ever since. Their art, their philosophies, their contradictions of kindness and cruelty, and I have reached a conclusion that chills me still. Humans are not more violent than others. They are simply better at it, more innovative, more thorough, more willing to bend the laws of both physics and morality to achieve victory. Now their influence spreads ever outward. They trade, they share technology, they present themselves as partners in peace. But every government knows, cross them, kill their people, threaten their interests, and consequences will come vast and unfathomable. We wiped out a colony. They erased a star system, and somewhere, hidden in their vaults, Project Prometheus waits, reserved for the next civilization, arrogant enough to test them. This is Torlicum Zum, last chief historian of the Xerian hegemony. I end this record with a warning to any who hear it. Humanity carries a phrase that is both a promise and a threat. We once dismissed it as primitive bravado. We learned its truth the hardest way possible.